Hello, and welcome to the Bible study on the book of Romans. Yesterday, we looked at how Paul exhorted these Jewish and Gentile believers in Rome to both be obedient to authorities God has placed over us, pay taxes, and as long as you're abiding by the law, you should be good. Paul reminded them that they needed to wake up and realize that submitting to the lust of the flesh was not being in the light, and that every day from decision one, we put on Christ. And so today we begin by looking at Romans chapter 14. And again, we ask this question: what is it about this Jewish and Gentile church that Paul is specifically speaking to that he feels needs to be addressed? Let's start in Romans chapter 14, verses 1 through 3. Now, accept the one who is weak in faith, but not for the purpose of passing judgment on his opinions. One person has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only. The one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat, and the one who does not eat is not to judge the one who eats, for God has accepted him. It's not just a simple accept them. It is to take a strong personal interest in receiving them. When Paul says they are weak in faith, it means they are infants in the faith and are struggling with what is and is not lawful for a Christ follower, which, knowing that, takes discernment. Is it discipleship? Is it discipline? Or is it teaching them how to walk in the Spirit and hearing his voice and thus learning and living accordingly? You see, food is a very big thing to someone who is Jewish. And likewise, food offered up to idols was a very big thing to pagans. And it makes sense that these believers would clash as they were learning to let go of past beliefs. Jesus said in Matthew 15, verse 11, "It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles the man." You see, both sides needed to learn this. And there is this place where we have to let people learn. And I'm learning that most times when someone asks me if they have to stop this or do that or whatever, the best response is I'm not the one to ask. Ask Jesus. What do we all know? We know that when we are told something, that it is simply a rule. But when God shows it to us, it's so much easier because it is a truth that one can trust and believe on a deeply personal level. And so if a fellow believer is holding on to a belief about food that you personally have been shown freedom in, don't judge them because of where they are, but accept them as a fellow brother or sister and come alongside them. But how we do that matters too. Let's continue in verse 4. Who are you to judge the servant of another? To his own master he stands or falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. I find this so fascinating because Paul is abundantly clear many times that as fellow believers that we are to hold others accountable. But the distinguishing factor here is that what one is judging others of and clearly finding them guilty isn't actually God's right or wrong, but man's. Paul is clearly pointing out that in this specific area of food, that if Jesus is their master, then let him be the one who brings them to a place of freedom. And when he does, they will stand on the real truth. Let's look at verses 5 through 9. One person regards one day above another, and another regards every day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord. For he gives thanks to God, and he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat, and gives thanks to God. For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be both Lord of the dead and of the living. Now, Paul is addressing the Sabbath, which is very much a Jewish issue. It's also an issue that has come back via the Hebrew roots movement. You're not a follower if you don't observe that day. There is quite a lot to look at in regards to this, but the long and short of it is Jesus is our Sabbath. A Hebrew observes the Sabbath on Saturday. Did you know that it is only one of the 10 commandments that Jesus did not reiterate in his ministry? If Christ is our Sabbath, then it's not so much about a single day, but rather a life of worship. We have to rest in him. But Paul's saying what one does, Sabbath or eating or anything, the real question is, are we doing it for the Lord? Are we living for him? That's the real focus. I'm going to end this lesson here. Please join me as we continue walking through Romans chapter 14. Again, thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next one.